A few weeks ago, I made a video where I was using the Liberty launcher and I happened to mention that it was quite a good weapon in the title of the video, but looking back at it now, I realized that statement wasn't entirely truthful. Although I do think that the launcher can be good to some extent, I don't think it can easily achieve this just by itself. In fact, I paired it off with the buff banner in that video. Although I may have not gotten many kills with it, I did find it more useful than using something like the battalion's backup. Though at the same time, I do find myself using the buff banner a lot more than anything else, but regardless, many players consider the Liberty launcher to be one of the worst primaries for soldiers simply because it does not do enough damage by itself to make a difference. Sure, it might be better in other aspects, but for general use, it can be a bit disappointing. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, if the Liberty launcher really is a terrible weapon and if it's even worth using at all. But first things first, let's talk about the stats of this weapon. So the Liberty launcher has an extra 25% clip size capacity, its projectile speed is 40% faster, its blast damage is decreased by 25% from rocket jumps, and it has a 25% damage penalty. Based on what we read, it seems like the pros outweigh the cons in many ways, but let's see how significant that 25% damage penalty is. If we take a look at the damage of the launcher, its base damage is 68, its maximum ramp up is 84, and its maximum fall off is 36. If you were to get a crit, you'll do a total of 203 damage, while a mini crit does between 91 and 114. Now let's compare the damage with the stock rocket launcher. Over on the right, we can see that the damage overall is much higher than with the Liberty launcher. Your rockets are going to deal a lot more damage, not just from a direct hit, but also from blast damage. And keep in mind, these two rocket launchers have the same blast damage. The only difference is that when you rocket jump, you do a lot less damage to yourself with the Liberty launcher than with stock. But to many people, this doesn't really matter because you can pair off the rocket launcher with the gunboats or maybe the man treads. But what if you don't want to use the gunboats? What if you want to be more of a team player, not only helping yourself but also others? I'll get to that in a minute, but first, let's see how much damage you do overall between these two rocket launchers. First, let's take a look at the Liberty launcher. If we multiply the base damage by 5, we get 340 damage. Multiplying crit damage by 5 will give us 1015, while mini crit damage by 114 will give us 570. Although these numbers do seem a bit high, let's see how they stack up with the stock rocket launcher. So if we multiply the base damage of 90 by 4, we will get a total of 360 damage. Multiplying a crit of 270 by 4 will give us 1080 damage, while a mini crit by 151 will give us 604 damage. So needless to say, that extra rocket that the Liberty launcher has did not really help out in doing more overall damage than with stock. Of course, this is attributed to the 25% damage penalty that the Liberty launcher carries. But despite this rather big drawback, I think that the Liberty launcher can be a useful primary, if not a good one, in the right hands. And in order to achieve this, one very special secondary is needed, something that I've talked about and used many times before in the past. The buff banner is really the only thing that you'll need if you're going to use the Liberty launcher. Now, if you've seen my previous video on the direct hit, I mentioned that the buff banner should definitely be used a lot more by soldier mains, especially if you're using a rocket launcher that does a lot less damage than stock. You may not always be able to activate the buff banner, but it sure does kick ass when you do. So how well does this work out in practical use? Well, for the most part, you can take down opponents that have 125 health in 3 hits, or maybe even 2 if you're lucky. Any class that has 200 health or more requires 4 or maybe even 5 rockets to deal with. Although that may sound a bit underwhelming, it's important to know how to use the Liberty launcher. For example, unless if you have mini crits or if you're being healed by a medic, I don't really recommend fighting multiple opponents at the same time. Your splash damage is simply not enough to deal with more than 2 opponents, especially if they have high health. And because of this, you'll find yourself reloading a lot more than actually shooting. It may not be an entire deal breaker if you're fighting a class like the sniper, but if you're fighting another soldier who has a rocket launcher that does more damage, then it can be a big problem. But regardless, it's just better to engage in one-on-one battles instead of multiple. With that said, now we could talk about the buff banner. Like I mentioned before, I think any rocket launcher that does less damage than stock can really benefit from this secondary. Though it's kind of obvious considering that any weapon that does splash damage can become really overpowered with crits or mini crits. And just to prove how well this could work out, I'm going to show some footage of me and my team just almost completely destroying the enemy team.
Let's destroy the engineers. Sentries are down. Everything's down.
Yeah, my sentry's still up.
No, their stuff is down. We just completely destroyed their nest. They have one more teleporter. Try and get rid of it. Good stuff, guys. It's the power of America. There was a heavy medic combo coming in.
Yeah, this is fine.
Let's go get that heavy medic combo. Oh, they're not here. That's good. The fact that this man's running a Liberty launcher is insane. He's doing well with it.
Yeah, that sure was something, wasn't it? Now, I'm not going to pretend like I did all of that by myself, but this just goes to show if you have the right equipment, the Liberty Launcher can be a pretty good weapon to use. And I think the reason why this worked out so well for me was because of that 40% projectile speed, which allowed me to get kills a lot faster and to catch up to opponents who were running away. Although this was very similar to the direct hit, I didn't exactly have pinpoint accuracy. And I think that's fine because the Liberty Launcher acts more like the airstrike than really the direct hit. And speaking of the airstrike, this still surprises me, but it does 10% more damage than the Liberty Launcher. And not just that, but you also take 10% more damage when you rocket jump, which I still find strange about it. But nevertheless, I would still pick the Liberty Launcher as my third favorite primary for soldier. In fact, here's some footage of me using the Liberty Launcher in two ways. The first is normal, and as you can see, although it seems like I'm doing a lot of damage, it's not enough to actually get a kill. But as soon as I activate the buff banner, all of a sudden I'm getting kills left and right. This is something more difficult to achieve with when using the airstrike because accuracy is pretty much out of the picture and you won't have enough time in the air to actually fire all of your rockets. Not only that, but you might also end up running out of ammo more quickly if you're not careful with how many rockets you use at a time. So that's pretty much it. I was considering talking about rocket jumping in this video, but I'd figure most people already know that this is the best rocket launcher to rocket jump with that does damage. Plus, I'm not really good at that stuff, so I won't have enough footage or really things to talk about. But regardless, I hope you guys found this video entertaining at the very least. I don't know how helpful it would be for people who are considering using the Liberty Launcher as their new primary. But even if you aren't, I hope you could give it a try at the very least. Anyways, have a good day.